My name is Avery Collins. I'm 34 years old, and until recently, I believed I had finally built the kind of life people spend their whole adulthood chasing. If you had asked me 6 months ago how I was doing, I would have said good, stable, quietly proud. Not flashy, not perfect, but solid. I live in Austin, Texas, in a modest three-bedroom house that once belonged to my grandparents. It's not the kind of place that shows up on real estate TikToks. The floors creak in the hallway, the paint in the guest room doesn't quite match, the back fence leans a little after heavy rain. But every inch of that house is mine. Not emotionally, not symbolically, legally, fully, earned. I bought it at 27, after years of juggling 2 jobs, paying down student loans, and saying no to things other people my age said yes to without thinking. I learned early that peace doesn't come from excitement. It comes from structure, from knowing your bills are paid, from locking your door at night and knowing no one can take what's inside. I thought I was done surviving. I thought I was finally just living. Then I got engaged. His name was Ethan Parker. We met at a small fundraising event downtown, the kind with cheap wine, folding chairs, and big promises about community impact. He was charming without trying too hard, curious without prying, the kind of man who listened in a way that made you feel like you were the most organized thing in his life. That should have been my first warning. We dated for 2 years. He moved slowly, said he admired my independence, joked about how I had my life figured out. When he proposed, it wasn't dramatic. No crowd, no cameras, just us, sitting on my back porch at sunset, cicadas buzzing, him sliding a ring across the table and asking quietly if I'd marry him. I said yes without hesitation. What I didn't know then was that while I was planning a future, he was planning a transfer. 3 weeks ago, Ethan handed me a manila folder across my dining table. He smiled like he always did when he wanted something to feel normal. He said, "Just something we should go over, a prenup." That word didn't scare me. It actually reassured me. I believed in clarity, in fairness, in protecting what we each brought into a marriage. I opened the folder expecting mutual boundaries. What I found instead was a document that would have handed him half my house and half his debt the moment we said I do. And that was just the beginning. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone, really trusted them, only to realize later they were quietly positioning themselves to benefit from everything you'd built? If you have, I want you to share your story in the comments. You'd be surprised how many people think they're alone in this. And if stories about betrayal, boundaries, and hard-earned justice matter to you, take a second to subscribe. Because what almost happened to me didn't start with cruelty. It started with paperwork. When I realized what that prenup actually meant, I felt something I still struggle to name. It wasn't fear, it wasn't heartbreak, it was the cold recognition that the person I was about to marry didn't see my stability as something to respect. He saw it as something to claim. And once you see that, really see it, there's no unseeing it. That night, I sat alone at my dining table long after Ethan left, the folder open in front of me, like evidence at a crime scene. My house hummed quietly around me, unaware that someone had just tried to turn it into collateral. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything cracked. If you'd asked anyone who knew me before Ethan, they would have called me steady, dependable, predictable, the girl who color-coded her calendar and paid her bills 2 weeks early just for peace of mind. That's who I was when he met me. Back then, I didn't see how stability could look like opportunity to the wrong kind of person. I met Ethan at a charity event my best friend dragged me to. I remember walking into the hall feeling awkward, clutching a lukewarm glass of wine, wondering how soon I could leave without looking rude. He was standing near the silent auction table talking to an older couple about local startups. When he turned to me, he smiled with the kind of warmth that makes you forget what you were nervous about. He was funny, but not loud, polite, but confident, The kind of man who looked you in the eye when you spoke and didn't interrupt. After years of dating people who treated me like a background task, that felt like sunlight. Ethan told me he'd gone through a few rough years, business ideas that hadn't panned out, debts he was paying off, but he was getting back on track. I admired his honesty, or what I thought was honesty. We started dating slowly. I liked that he didn't rush. I liked that he didn't seem threatened by my independence. He used to say, "You're the most put-together person I've ever met." At first, it sounded like a compliment. Later, it would sound like a warning. In the beginning, he made everything feel lighter. He'd fix things around the house, cook dinner when I came home late, bring flowers just because. It was easy to believe he was different. When he met my friends, they told me I'd finally found someone who saw me. My mom said she hadn't seen me smile like that in years. I wanted them to be right. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't just building alone. I thought I was building with someone. We planned weekends at the lake, made lists for the wedding, talked about maybe having kids someday. He'd sit at the kitchen table watching me balance my budget spreadsheet and joke that he'd never met anyone who could make Excel look sexy. I laughed because it sounded like affection, but looking back, it was fascination, the kind people have for something they intend to use. Still, I ignored the tiny moments that didn't add up, the times he'd forget his wallet at dinner, the short-term loans that somehow didn't get paid back. I told myself relationships were about give and take, and maybe I was still learning how to let someone give to me. So when he moved in, I let him. It started small, a few boxes in the living room, a jacket on the coat rack, his toothbrush beside mine. He called my house our place long before we were engaged. I didn't correct him. It felt sweet, domestic, the kind of word that promised permanence. And then came the proposal. It wasn't extravagant, no flash mobs or rose petals, just Ethan and me on the porch at sunset, a soft "will you marry me?" and a ring that wasn't fancy but felt thoughtful. I said yes without hesitation. That night, I remember sitting beside him, our fingers laced, and thinking, after everything I've worked for, this finally feels safe. If only I'd known that safety was the illusion. Because every act of love, every dinner, every shared dream was quietly laying the groundwork for something else. I used to believe people like Ethan didn't notice the small things I did to keep life steady, the automatic bill payments, the organized folders, the way I triple-checked every form. But he noticed. He studied. He learned exactly what I valued because that's what he planned to target. And I, blinded by comfort, mistook observation for love. It's strange how the same routines that once made me proud became the very thing he would later try to dismantle. I built a home on hard work and self-respect. He saw it and smiled, not because he admired it, but because he was already imagining his name on the deed. I didn't see it coming. I should have. But love has a way of making you look directly at danger and call it devotion. The moment everything shifted wasn't loud. There was no screaming, no dramatic confession, just a kitchen, a stack of papers, and a man who suddenly stopped pretending. It happened on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks before our wedding. I was standing at the stove, stirring garlic and butter into a pan, still wearing my work clothes. The house smelled warm and familiar, safe. Ethan leaned against the counter behind me, swirling a glass of wine like he'd had a long day, even though I knew he'd spent most of it researching his next move, which usually meant YouTube and half-written notes. "My sister's been talking about prenups," he said casually, eyes not meeting mine. "She thinks it's smart, protects both people." I didn't tense up. I didn't feel offended. If anything, I felt relieved. "That makes sense," I said. "We should both have our own lawyers. Keep it clean." He paused. It was brief, barely a flicker, but I noticed it. His jaw tightened, his fingers stilled on the glass. "Actually," he said, "my sister has a friend who's a lawyer. He can draft it for us. Cheap. No reason to waste money." That was the first red flag. Not the size of it, just the fact that it was there. I ignored it. "As long as it's fair," I said. "I don't care who writes it." He smiled then. a slow, satisfied smile, like I'd just agreed to something without realizing what it was. A week later, he brought the prenup home in a manila folder. We sat across from each other at my dining table, the one I'd refinished myself years earlier, sanding it down on weekends until my hands blistered. He slid the folder toward me like it was a formality. Just read through it, then we can sign and be done. The first page was harmless. Names, dates, standard language about marriage. The second page felt like being shoved. According to the document, my house, the one I bought before I met him, the one I had fully paid off, would become marital property the moment we married. If we ever divorced, it would be sold and split evenly. I kept reading, my pulse climbing. His debt, nearly $80,000 from what he'd always called a failed investment period, would become shared marital debt. If he defaulted, I'd be responsible. My fingers tightened around the paper. "This can't be right," I said quietly. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, calm as ever. "That's how prenups work." I turned the pages toward him and pointed. "This says my house becomes joint property immediately." "Well, yeah, I'll be living there." "And this says your debt becomes ours. Marriage is about sharing everything," he replied, like he'd rehearsed it. Something snapped. "No," I said, steady but cold. "This isn't sharing. This is me giving you half my house and taking on your debt." His expression hardened. "You're acting like I'm trying to rob you." I held the packet up between us. "You are." He slammed his hand on the table, making the forks jump. "My sister's friend said this is standard." "Then your sister's friend is either incompetent or this was written to screw me over." His face flushed red. "We don't have time for this," he snapped. "The wedding's 3 months. Then we delay the wedding because I'm not signing this." He stood up abruptly, grabbing the folder. "You're being ridiculous. You're choosing your house over me." "I'm choosing fairness. If you loved me, you wouldn't hand me this." His voice dropped, sharp and ugly. "Maybe we should just call the whole thing off." The room went silent. The pan on the stove hissed softly, like it didn't want to interrupt. "Maybe we should," I said. He froze, staring at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You're really doing this over a piece of paper?" "It's not just paper. It tells me how you see our future." He grabbed his keys. "Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." The door slammed behind him, echoing through the house. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the space where he'd been. Then I sat back down, opened the folder again, and read every word carefully. It was worse the second time. Alimony clauses tilted in his favor, language that shifted everything I owned into shared territory while shielding him from nothing, a section that gave him leverage to force the sale of my home. This wasn't a prenup, it was a trap, and the anger that rose in me wasn't explosive, it was precise. The kind that comes when you finally realize the betrayal wasn't impulsive, it was planned. After Ethan slammed the door, the house felt unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful, not calm, just hollow. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the dent his anger had left in the air, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant hiss of the pan I'd forgotten on the stove. I turned it off, moved on autopilot, like my body was functioning while my mind lagged behind, trying to catch up with what had just happened. This was the man I was supposed to marry, the man who had looked me in the eye and told me he loved me, the man who had just tried to legally dismantle my life and then accused me of being unreasonable. I sat back down at the dining table and opened the prenup again, this time reading it like a puzzle I needed to solve before it destroyed me. Line by line, clause by clause, every sentence felt colder than the last. The more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with a deep, aching sadness. I thought about all the times I'd defended him, all the moments I'd brushed off my instincts because I didn't want to be that person, suspicious, guarded, hard. I'd wanted to believe love meant lowering your defenses. Instead, I'd lowered my shield. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation we'd ever had about money. The jokes, the deflections, the way he always framed my caution as control and his recklessness as freedom. By morning, my phone was already buzzing. Text after text. From Ethan, from his sister, from a number I didn't recognize, probably another family member drafted into the campaign. You're overreacting. You're sabotaging your own happiness. Marriage requires sacrifice. You're choosing a house over love. Each message felt like a hand pressing down on my chest, trying to make me doubt what I'd seen with my own eyes. At work, I couldn't focus. Numbers blurred on my screen. Emails went unanswered. I kept imagining my house, my safe place, slipping out from under me, sold off in some future courtroom because I'd been too tired, too emotional, too scared to say no. That was the moment the despair hit fully. Not fear of losing Ethan, fear of losing myself. By noon, Ethan finally called. "You're ignoring me," he snapped the second I answered. "I've been working," I said quietly. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. My sister's friend said it's standard. You're making me look like a villain." I closed my eyes. "Explain to me how it's fair that my house becomes ours, but your debt becomes mine." Silence. Then, "That's marriage." "No, that's exploitation." His voice sharpened. "You're sabotaging our wedding. This is exactly what my sister warned me about." That sentence, "my sister warned me about," landed heavier than the rest, because suddenly I understood this wasn't just Ethan. This was a shared mindset, a shared narrative where my boundaries were obstacles to be removed. "You care more about property than people," he said. A few months ago, that accusation would have shattered me. Now, it just felt manipulative. "You're giving me an ultimatum," I said slowly. "If that's what it takes, sign it, or we're done. Wedding's off." When the call ended, I sat there, staring at my dark phone screen, my reflection faint and unfamiliar. For the first time since this started, I felt truly alone. No partner, no future I recognized, just a choice that felt impossible. For a brief, dangerous moment, I considered giving in, signing, making it stop. That thought scared me more than anything else, because it meant I was closer to losing myself than I ever wanted to admit. The moment that changed everything wasn't dramatic. There was no music cue, no sudden rush of courage, just a quiet realization that settled into my chest sometime after midnight as I sat alone at my kitchen table with the prenup spread out in front of me. I wasn't confused anymore. Confusion is loud. It argues with itself. It makes excuses. What I felt then was different. It was clarity. I reached for my phone and scrolled past Ethan's name without hesitation. Instead, I stopped at Mason Green, a law school friend I hadn't spoken to in years, now a family attorney in Dallas. My thumb hovered for a second, that old instinct whispering, "Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." Then I ignored it. I took photos of every page of the prenup and sent them with a simple message. "Can you look at this? He wants me to sign it." The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, appeared again. My heart thudded in the silence of the house. Then Mason called. "Please tell me I'm overreacting," I said before he could speak. He didn't hesitate. I wish I could. The way he said it, flat, professional, stripped of emotion, made my stomach drop. This isn't a standard prenup. This is a wealth transfer dressed up as marriage. If you sign this, you're volunteering to absorb his debt and give him leverage over your property. I closed my eyes. "So I'm not crazy?" I whispered. "No," he said firmly. "You're being targeted." That word hit harder than anything else. Targeted. Mason explained it calmly, clause by clause, how my house would become marital property immediately, how the debt language was intentionally vague to protect him and trap me, how the alimony terms were tilted just enough to look reasonable at first glance. This document was designed by someone who knows exactly what they're doing, and it's not in your interest. Something shifted inside me as he spoke. The fog lifted. All the self-doubt Ethan and his family had tried to plant, "You're controlling, you're selfish, you're dramatic," evaporated under the weight of facts. "What do I do?" I asked. "You don't sign anything. I'll draft a fair prenup, one that keeps your house separate, keeps his debt his, and protects both of you equally. If he truly wants marriage, he'll agree. If he doesn't, well, then you'll have your answer." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at my reflection in the dark window. For the first time in days, I wasn't afraid. I was angry, but the kind of anger that sharpens rather than burns, the kind that brings your spine back online. I texted Ethan. "I had a lawyer review the prenup. It's extremely one-sided. I won't sign it. My attorney is drafting a fair agreement. We can review it together next week." The message showed as delivered. Then nothing. No reply, no argument, just silence. That silence told me more than any words could have. The next morning, I went to work and actually finished my tasks. I ate lunch without nausea. I slept that night without replaying conversations in my head. It felt like my nervous system had finally been given permission to stand down. Around noon the next day, Ethan finally texted, "Your lawyer? I thought we were using mine. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." I read the message slowly, noticing how easily he dismissed my autonomy. Protecting what I earned is not making a big deal. It's setting boundaries. His response came fast. "Fair would be you trusting me." And that was it. The last illusion fell away. Trust, I realized, doesn't ask you to gamble your future. Love demands collateral. By the time I put my phone down, something steady had taken root inside me. I wasn't trying to save the relationship anymore. I was saving myself.
Ethan didn't disappear quietly. Once it became clear I wasn't going to fold, his tone changed, exactly the way Mason had predicted. The confidence drained first, then the anger returned, sharper and more desperate, like a cornered animal realizing the exit was closing. It started with messages that tried to sound wounded. "Can we talk? I don't understand why you're doing this. I thought we were a team." I didn't respond. By the next morning, the messages shifted again. "You're choosing a house over a relationship. You're throwing everything away over paperwork. My sister says you're overreacting." Each text felt like a hand reaching back into my chest, trying to pull me into an old version of myself, the one who explained, softened, apologized for having boundaries. That version of me didn't exist anymore. That afternoon, my phone rang. Ethan's name lit up the screen. I answered, already calm in a way that surprised me. "You've been avoiding me," he snapped. "I've been thinking," I said, "something you should have done before handing me that contract." "You're twisting everything," he said. "That prenup wasn't stealing. I love you." "You love what I have," I replied evenly. "There's a difference." Silence. Then his voice dropped into something colder, more precise. "You have until Sunday," he said. "Sign the prenup I gave you, or we're done. Wedding's off, everything's off." A few days earlier, that ultimatum would have terrified me. Instead, I laughed. Not hysterically, just a short, disbelieving sound that surprised both of us. "Being done sounds perfect," I said. "You don't mean that," he said quickly. "You're just emotional." "No," I replied. "I'm finally clear." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline, from the strange, exhilarating realization that I was no longer being controlled by the threat of loss. That night, Mason emailed me a draft letter. It wasn't dramatic, it didn't accuse or insult. It was calm, precise, and devastating in its restraint. The prenup was coercive and financially predatory. I would not sign any agreement drafted by Ethan or his associates. Any further attempts to pressure, intimidate, or contact me regarding my property would be considered harassment and met with legal action. My boundaries written in ink. Sunday morning, I scheduled a courier. At 12:17 p.m., I got the delivery confirmation, signed for by E. Parker. My phone rang 17 minutes later. "How could you do this to me?" Ethan demanded, his voice thick, uneven, like he'd practiced sounding hurt. "How could you send lawyers after me?" "I didn't," I said, calmly. "I sent clarity. You didn't even give me a chance to explain. Then explain the debt. Explain why your prenup gave me liabilities and gave you assets. Explain why every risk landed on my shoulders." Silence. Heavy. Exposing. Finally, I spoke. "We're done, Ethan." "No, wait." I hung up. Then I blocked his number. I blocked his sister. I blocked every family member and mutual contact who'd suddenly found an opinion about my finances. The house felt different after that. Not empty, protected. A few hours later, Mason called. "He tried to reach me," he said. "Wanted to know if there was any way to reverse your decision." I closed my eyes and exhaled. What did he tell him? That I represent you, not him, and that he needs to stop. That night, I changed the locks. The sound of the new deadbolt clicking into place was louder than it needed to be, a clean, final sound that echoed through the house like punctuation. For the first time since this began, I slept deeply. Not because everything was fixed, but because justice doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, the moment you refuse to be used again.
6 weeks passed. 6 weeks without Ethan's name lighting up my phone. 6 weeks without explaining myself. 6 weeks of waking up in my house, my fully paid, fully earned house, and feeling something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Relief. Not the loud, celebratory kind, the quiet kind that settles into your bones and tells your nervous system it can finally stand down. Life returned to its old rhythms, almost shyly at first. My grocery bill dropped back to normal, the electric bill shrank, the dishwasher went back to being loaded properly instead of the chaotic guessing game Ethan always played. My evenings became quiet again, tea on the counter, my budget spreadsheet open, the soft hum of a home that wasn't being negotiated over anymore. Friends asked questions, some gently, some with curiosity disguised as concern. "Do you regret it? Do you miss him? Was it really worth ending everything over a prenup?" At first, I didn't know how to answer without defending myself. Then, one afternoon, standing in the hallway with a paint roller in my hand, it clicked. I wasn't repainting because the old blue splash bothered me. I was repainting because I wasn't the same person who'd made it. I didn't want to erase the past. I wanted to mark a new season. That's when I realized something important. I didn't lose anything. I escaped. A few days later, I ran into someone at the hardware store, a man flipping through paint samples, tall, tired-looking, polite in the careful way people are after they've been burned. Recognition crossed his face at the same time it crossed mine. We had dated the same person. Different years, same story. He told me how Ethan had run up tens of thousands on his credit cards, how the business ideas turned into vacations and bottle service, how shame kept him quiet longer than it should have. I felt stupid, he admitted. I shook my head. He didn't choose stupid people. He chose stable ones. That truth settled deep inside me. People like Ethan don't hunt chaos. They hunt structure. Because structure is harder to build and easier to steal. The weeks that followed were lighter than I expected. I went on a few casual dates, nothing serious. I wasn't afraid of love. I just wasn't willing to confuse intensity with intimacy anymore. Sometimes late at night, I replayed small moments, the jokes I'd laughed off, the questions I stopped asking, the way my instincts had whispered, "This feels off," long before my brain caught up.
I used to think regret meant pain. Now I understand it differently. Regret is ballast. It doesn't sink you, it steadies you. I don't regret loving Ethan. I regret ignoring myself. I regret giving someone access to my stability without making sure he brought his own. I regret mistaking charm for character. But those regrets don't weigh me down anymore. They protect me. These days, when I lock my door at night, I don't wonder who might try to take what I've built. I don't feel the need to justify my boundaries or soften my no. My house feels quiet again. Not empty, not lonely, safe. And if there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Love doesn't ask you to sign away your future. Trust doesn't demand collateral. And anyone who frames your self-protection as selfish is already telling you who they are. If you've ever walked away from something that looked like love but felt like a trap, you're not cold, you're not broken, you're awake. And sometimes waking up is the bravest thing you'll ever do. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your experience in the comments. Subscribe if you believe stories about boundaries, betrayal, and quiet justice deserve to be told, because the world already has enough voices defending the wrong people.